Forest ecosystems are essential parts of civilization. They serve as a habitat for many organisms and provide various resources and services. Many citizens today often forget about the many goods and services provided by a forest. From healthy oxygen to lumber and medicinal uses, this particular ecosystem serves as a diversified community contributing to the economy as well as animal habitat.
When we picture a forest, the first visual that comes to mind are trees. We know that trees help to maintain healthy air quality for humans and animals, but most people tend to forget about their economic contribution.
The lumber from trees in a forest is used for construction materials and to supply fuel for heat. In fact, statistics suggest that approximately 1.86 billion cubic meters of wood is extracted from forests for fuel, wood, and conversion to charcoal.
In addition, all paper products we often take for granted for everyday use are derived from forest trees.
Humans are greatly dependent on forests for different herbs and plants to fight disease. A significant amount of the drugs we use today are extracted from tropical plants and animals, and the majority of drugs used to fight cancer come from forests as well.
The medicinal products from these forests contribute to disease regulation and scientific discovery for cures. Here is a classic example of related goods and services and their contribution to a healthy society.
Forests provide a strong barrier against erosion and excess flooding.
Tree roots bind the soil and prevent erosion caused by wind or water. Leaf fall also serves as a protective cover for the soil.
Forests stabilize the climate in general. The plants enrich the soil by recycling the nutrients through the shedding of leaves and seeds.
They also help to regulate the water cycle by absorbing and redistributing water for precipitation quite proportionally to every species living within its range.
Food is most likely one of the most obvious resources that comes from forests. The animals in the ecosystem depend on vegetation and fruit for their diet, as well as the natural order of the food chain. However, people today often neglect the importance of forests in the developing world.
In the United States, it is very easy to forget about where our food ultimately comes from. It is always at the nearby supermarket, prepared and ready to be taken home.
Unfortunately, people of developing nations do not always have such a convenient advantage. Forests are their only source of food as well as materials for their homes. In addition to feeding their household, forests are especially important to their livestock. Without a sustainable food source for livestock, families would starve and face deprivation of one of their only economic gains for minimum income.
Recreation is one of the most enjoyable services that come from forests.
For many, a forest is a tranquil escape from the chaos and stress of their everyday lives.
Camping, photography, hiking, fishing, and birdwatching are all among the many activities provided free of charge by a forest.
Last but not least, let's not forget those marshmallow sticks! Clearly, it is very important to conserve a forest ecosystem. Studies have shown that there is a loss of 13 million hectares of forest per year. Forests provide many goods and resources that humans and animals rely on every day.
Many rules and regulations have been enforced to conserve forests around the world. The Department of Natural Resources, Forest Service, and various partners wrote for the Forest Conservation Act and regulations.
In 1991, the Maryland Forest Conservation Act was enacted to minimize the loss during land development by making the identification and protection of forests and other sensitive areas an integral part of the planning process.
Although this conservation example is focused on a specific area, the same types of regulations have been enacted throughout various regions. In fact, during the first 15 years of implementation, the FCA has been responsible for the review of 199,925 acres of forest on projects scheduled for development.
Of those, 120,638 acres were retained, 71,885 acres were cleared, and 21,461 acres were planted with new forest. In other words, at least twice as many acres were protected or planted as were cleared.
Very similar to the Forest Conservation Act in the United States, on a global scale, India has also enforced similar regulations. The Forest Conservation Ordinance of 1980, now simply the Forest Conservation Act, extends throughout the country, putting a focus on the well-being on forests from a government standpoint.
These acts are all examples of forest management. Codes and regulations need to be enforced to ensure that a forest maintains its sustainability. The maximum sustained yield needs to be under close consideration for all natural goods and services. For example, the amount of trees cut down and food taken from the forest needs to be monitored by placing an individual quota, depending on the type of land, location, and abundance of resources. For countless reasons, forests are an essential part of society. They provide natural resources and services, and we must be careful and not take the biodiversity forests provide for granted. They are integral for society, for animal populations, as well as human survival.